All right. Tim Kaine, cultural changes for games.
Hi, everyone. It's me,
Hi,
Tim.
Tim.
Today, I want to talk about cultural
Yeah.
changes. And I specifically want to get into, eventually, because I'm going to tell some stories first, of why you should be very aware of how fast the culture changes and how this should affect how you design and develop your video games. Because you can quickly get stuck with a game that seems laughable or archaic very quickly, and not because of the graphics, but because of your inability to predict cultural changes. But I will get to that.
Oh god. I mean, there's so much to unpack with cultural changes. I mean, there's some things that you're gonna make in the moment that are going to age like milk, and we all know examples of this of games that I think try to make especially like cultural statements in the moment, and then are just not relevant many years later. Concord was ahead of its time. I also think that cultural changes are important because you do need to consider that something might not just be offensive from like calling somebody a gonna get me demonetized. I'm not even monetized on YouTube, so who the fuck cares? It's saying to somebody like you're a fucking idiot in a game, right? Like your character, like that's offensive, right? But that's not offensive to a point that is offending a culture. It is offending a character. But you can do things that offend a culture. I mean, look at Assassin's Creed uh, Shadows, for instance. I'm not going to get too deep into that one in this video, but there are things you can do to offend a culture, even when you're trying to do something that is considered culturally sensitive for your own culture. Making cultural changes is sometimes you won't know. Like, who the hell knows what everybody's culture in the world is and how to properly handle it, right? I mean, look at Japanese culture is very formal. It's very hierarchical. You have people in service positions like a tour guide that speak with very different language than in anywhere else in the country because it is seen as a you are providing a service, you must speak in this specific way and use these specific terms and uh, you know words and ways to grammar. It's so different from like Western society where yeah, a polite tour guide is okay, but you wouldn't mind a tour guide that cracks jokes or something. But you need to be very careful about doing that like in Japan, for instance. So cultures are a crazy thing, and having people often talk about like Sweet Baby Inc. Again, not going to get too deep into that. To a certain extent, cultural liaisons or consultants, that's what I was looking for, are important for certain things. But you also want to make sure that you are not dramatically changing the tone of your game, of your art, to fit a culture or to do something that you think might offend the culture but wouldn't actually. It's I don't know, it's a whole term, it's a whole conversation we could have at a different time. Cultures are important to get right, and I think there's also ways to do it poorly, to pander. Nobody wants that, especially the culture that you're trying to pander to. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Now, I have a whole video about why I don't like cultural references, and I will link it below. And just to give you the
Like
synopsis
pop
right now, I
culture or
don't like
something.
cultural references for the same reason I don't like a lot of humor of a certain kind. I don't like anything in your game that makes the player feel like they're not getting it and are being excluded. I don't.
It would be like old South Park does this a lot more now, but they used to do it too with like references to actors at the time. And you watch that now and you're like, who? Oh yeah, it was this weird one thing that happened 20 years ago. Um, yeah, it's just like you wouldn't want to make a game right now that references like the 2024 U.S. presidential election because it's going to it's going to date your game, and it's just not going to matter at a certain point. Yeah, it's like haha, funny haha in the moment, but then after like 4 years, nobody's going to care.
Don't like anything that makes the player feel like an other. Like, oh shoot, this game is having fun and I'm not invited to the
Mm-hmm.
party. And certain humor can do that, but cultural references do that a lot. If you talk about, if you're trying to make fun of a musician or a politician or some current event, within 5 or 10 years, there are going to be a lot of people who forget it, don't know what you're talking about. They were a kid then, they didn't even know about it, and now they're a young adult and they're trying to play this game. They're like, who's George Bush? Who's Brit?
And just keep in mind too, South Park has like 3 Diddy episodes in it. Okay, just know sometimes your references might also age very poorly for other reasons than simply age. Okay.
Britney Spears, but so I don't like cultural references. But similarly, I'm going to talk about cultural changes, how our society changes in all kinds of ways, and how you have to be very careful about that. Now, I want to start this. Today is exactly 11 years since my mom passed away. I'm filming this in mid September. So I've been thinking about her a lot. And I've been going through family photos.
Shout out to
I've
moms.
taken the thousands of family photos that I've digitized and I've broken them into folders based on person. Even if that means I have to duplicate the picture in the different folders. Because that way I can click on, I have a folder for my mom. I can click on it and I can see every scanned folder, every scanned photo I have that has my mom in it. And one of them is this picture. I remember my mom describing this picture to me. It's a jeans dance. Now, one thing you'll notice, by the way, that's my mom right in the middle, in the jeans and the white shirt kind of profile. She just looks really happy. She's obviously smiling. She's dancing.
Jeans dance.
The first
I
thing
love
I
it.
noticed was, why is it only girls? Is it not boy girl or whatever? Now, I don't remember what she said. Either this was a gym class or it was an after school activity. I don't remember which one it was, but it was only girls. So the girls had to dance with girls. And you had to wear a particular kind of shoe with a particular kind of sole, or you weren't allowed on the gym floor because of the way it was coded. If you didn't have a shoe like that, you had to wear your sock. You had to just go out in your socks. Notice some of the girls have shoes and some of them are wearing just their socks because people didn't have enough money to afford a special soled shoe. And so if you didn't have it, it wasn't like they were going to go out and buy it, so they danced in their socks. But I always went back and I said, well, why was it called a jeans dance? And also, why are all the girls wearing blue jeans? And she said, oh, when I went to high school, and this is high school, this is probably about 1950 plus or minus a year. She said, when I went to high school, girls weren't allowed to wear jeans. And I was like, what? I mean, when I was in high school in the early 80s, jeans were
Yeah,
practically a
everybody's wearing
uniform.
jeans, yeah.
I think everybody, boys and girls wore jeans. I mean, occasionally you'd see a kid in khakis, but it was almost always jeans. And I'm like, well, what would happen if the girl came to school wearing jeans? My mom was like, oh, they'd get sent home. They'd get sent home with a note. Their parents might be called to pick them
Oh
up.
yeah.
How dare your daughter
I
show
was gonna say like, oh, I get sent home. I don't have to go to school if I wear jeans. But it's like, yeah, but it's probably not great things will happen at home if you do that.
school wearing pants? Not just jeans, pants. Girls couldn't wear pants. And I was like, oh. Now,
What a time to be
there's
alive.
obviously been a huge cultural change since 1950. But one thing you have to remember, the people in this photo are range in age from maybe 15 to 17. Some of these people are still alive. And some of them still think that way. And some of them still vote. So let that settle in for a second. Now here's one for me. I'll give one from my era.
Okay. Here's the reality. Old people who haven't adapted still vote, and young people who don't know very much about the world vote. I think that at a certain point, they do kind of cancel each other out. At a certain level of idiocy, Kind of. I think it does cancel each other out, but maybe that's just me being a little bit too optimistic.
I grew up before smartphones, cell phones, anything like that. I grew up with landlines. And the rule was if your phone rang, you answered it. The phone would ring, the nearest person would scramble to get it.
Yeah.
Now, of course, occasionally you'd get a marketing call and you was like, oh, and you'd say like, "Oh, my mom and dad isn't here," or if they answered, like, "I don't want to, I'm not
But it
interested."
was like with landlines. That was all you had. You didn't have nobody had cell phones. So if somebody was trying to get in contact with you in the moment, it was landlines. No texting, no internet. No IMs, no IRCs, nothing. So if you didn't receive a letter in your mailbox saying something, but somebody was calling you, that means they are needing something in that moment. And yeah, it's like if you didn't answer, it was you missed something important. Nowadays, if you have a landline, who the fuck calls your landline anymore, right? But still, I remember this. I grew up in this time period too. I was born in '94, so it was like, yeah, I was born at a time where having a landline was the default, and that's how people communicated. They called your landline. Everybody called your landline.
After answering machines came out, which came out when I was a teenager, when answering machines came out, you could get messages, but you usually still answered the phone if
Mm-hmm.
you were home. As spam calls got worse, we stopped answering the phone, and most people lived a life of screening phone calls through your answering machine. And then, of course, once cell phones came into existence and they always had voicemail on them, people just stopped answering their phone altogether. To this day, if someone calls me, I probably don't pick up unless I
Same.
know they're going to call me and their name pops up. Which
Yeah,
means
if you're not in my contacts list, there is a very high chance I will not answer my phone. And I think most people that I talk to nowadays, if they wanted something, they would just text me, like, you have my number. Just send me a text. Like, if you needed to talk right now, okay, then just text me, hey, please call. Something like that. Sit down for dinner, let that fucker ring, they will leave a message.
they're calling me from a number they have in my contact list. Because maybe I'm watching a TV show, maybe I'm cooking a meal, maybe I'm walking the dog. There's a lot of reasons why you can't pick up, and then sometimes I just don't feel like answering the phone. This is a huge change from even when I was a teenager, where the phone rang, you scrambled to get it. It is a cultural shift. For an experiment, right now, you can look around you right now in whatever room you're in. There is something in your environment that's going to be gone or massively transformed in 20 or 30 years. You may not be able to guess what it is, but I guarantee you there's something in your room that is going to be viewed
Myself.
differently. That kids born now, in 20 years, they either won't understand the thing or they'll view it as
Me.
laughably archaic. There's all these videos on
Me.
YouTube of kids looking at old tech, like Game Boys and Walkmans, and
Yeah,
like,
I see that too. I think back when I was a kid, what would it have been? Records, maybe a little bit. Records were the hip thing, right? They were your grandpa might have had a record player. Maybe your parents had a record player still, but it was really all about cassette tapes. And I was still making mixes on a cassette tape, and we had a cassette recorder, and then CDs changed the game. And everybody was making their own mixtapes on fucking CDRs, right? That was the big thing. VHS tapes though were still pretty big for us until DVDs came out, and then there was the Blu-ray craze. But then it all went digital. It all went digital, and everybody was just pirating on LimeWire, Pirate Bay.
what is this? Now,
Also, MP3 players. MP3 players were that was, you know, I remember having like God, it was like an old one. It wasn't one of these. It was even before this. It's of this era, but it was before even a screen was added. I definitely had one of these. 100% I had one of these. I don't remember. This was definitely not my first one, but it was MP3 player 2000s. No, no, no. Might have been. You know, I might have had one of these. Creative. Yeah, I remember Creative being a big one at the time. Oh man, what a time to be alive. You guys remember these? This was recording from cassette to cassette through speaker and mic. Yeah, it's like nobody talk. Don't say anything. You're gonna mess it up. And then I had one of these, but then of course I think I had the I had a Zune. I had one of these, yeah, one of these old ones with the hard disk drive in it, dude. You could hear these things whirring in the background. They were heavy. They were pretty cool though. And then I had the HD one later. God, I miss this shit. Probably still have this back in my house in the US. I have 12 megabytes of this shit, dude. If you had 512, that was crazy. 512? How many songs you could fit on that? How many podcasts? And then the moment we had screens, we were all just like ripping DVDs. Who here was ripping DVDs to their PC and then putting really shitty quality like 360p movies onto their MP3 players? Yeah, we were all doing it. It was good. It was good. I think I had Dark Knight on my Zune, and I was just watching Dark Knight all the fucking time. Yeah, also on PSP. Oh man, good nostalgia.
A big question is, what is that thing going to be? Is it going to be tech? Is it your TV going to be laughable? That big flat screen 60-inch TV on your wall, is that going to be
You guys
laughable?
remember those thick? Okay, I know we're getting sidetracked. Plasma TV. It was the big ass plasma TVs, right? It was like the thick ones. Was it plasma? Or were they just the was it just like some old shitty projection TV? Probably just was a thick projection TV. These things used to be huge. Oh yeah, one of these. Oh my god, dude, these things weighed like 1,000,000 pounds. If you ever needed to move one of these, which you should never ever move, you needed like 5 people from the neighborhood to move this. Oh, kids will never understand just how heavy these things were. And they were terrible. If you didn't sit right in front of them, they looked horrid. And then plasma TVs came out and they were smaller, but they looked horrible from the side. It was really the LED TVs that changed the game. LED TVs were amazing. Well, 34 thick projector TV. Like it's worse. You got the huge rear projection TV. Fuck. Yeah, it was LED. LED changed the game because it was like you can watch this from any side. They're thin, they're light. Yes, they're expensive, but they're bright. They look good. You know the contrast looks great. And then you had OLED, which was the new thing. That was the greatest because you know it turns off the pixels when they're black, and so you get even better contrast. And then you had like the QLED. You have all this new like QLED stuff. No, it was LCD. Sorry, I missed LCD. LCD was first, then LEDs. LCD was where things changed. Back with the creation of blue LEDs, which, if you're ever interested, look up the history of the creation of the blue LED. It is wild. It is crazy how difficult it was to create blue as a color. Really
Well, in
cool.
a few years, is it going to be your console game, your game console? Is it going to be your smartphone? Are kids gonna be like, ha ha, these idiots didn't have neural laces and they had to stare at a screen rather than just see it in their mind's eye? Who knows? And it might even not even be tech. It might be a societal norm. I mentioned in one of my videos about my idea about clothing printers. Maybe in 20 or 30 years, people are going to go, these gross people rewore their clothes rather than printing out a fresh set every morning.
I'm still wearing things that I bought from Walmart 10 years ago. My shirt that I'm wearing now probably has at least 10 holes in it. They're not super big, but you know what? The shirt still works. Okay? The elastic on my underwear isn't as tight as it used to be, but it still holds up. Okay? Say what you want. Yes, I wear these often a lot, but it's because I wear them on the outside and they don't get dirty.
But they may even be looking back at us right now and go, those idiots thought colors or fabrics were specific to a particular gender. Or, haha, they thought there were only two genders. Those morons. Just stop here. Don't try to guess where this is going to go, because you're probably going to guess wrong.
True.
And that's kind of my point. If you're making a game and your game is dependent on you predicting what cultural changes are going to happen and you're hedging a lot of your game on those predictions, you're going to be wrong. You're going to be laughably, horrifically wrong, and your game will look dated. So
That's usually a problem that I think sci-fi has to deal with, and I think it's hard to write good sci-fi is because you have to think logically about where society is going to go. I mean, it's one of the things that makes Star Trek so great is just of how well it predicted some of the way that we see things in the future. Or that Cyberpunk, 2077 as an example, or just the Cyberpunk universe is so well made is because it seems like it is a pretty accurate portrayal of where certain things of the way that we work and the way that money moves and the way that we see bodies and things like that are going to move. These megalopolises with dystopias is pretty cool.
my recommendation to you as someone who's made a lot of brand new settings and new IP is you can pick a game type where you can avoid guessing altogether. Fantasy games, very cartoony games,
Yep.
historically set games. Like this is a game from the 14th century medieval period of Europe. You can just pick the tech that was appropriate for that. You don't have to do any guessing. If you do want to make a game in the future, like I did with Fallout or The Outer Worlds, what you want to do is you want to obviously put it forward. Here's one possible future, and even try to indicate it diverged from our timeline at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Fallout so enjoyable is it took a really aesthetically and culturally interesting time of the US and or of the world as a whole, and especially when technology was just it was like I don't know if what the right term for it is, but like the space age technology where everything is like rounded and then goes to like a point because it's supposed to look like this cool futuristic spaceship. I'm sure there's a term for it, I just don't know it. And they just kind of like dialed that up to 11 and said no, all the iBots are in the game are designed like that, and a lot of the armor and the weapons. Fallout did it well. Fallout did it well, and it works.
Like Fallout, we like to talk about they never made chips. They kept using vacuum tubes. They never made transistors.
That's right.
Or
Yeah.
in Outer Worlds, we're like, corporations and monopolies were never prevented, and so the future grew up around, corporate monopolistic practices. That way, you can have a future which you yourself, you the developer, are telling the player, this is not what I think our future is going to be. This is a possible future based on this what if idea. If you try to do anything other than that, I guarantee you will make a game that will be laughably wrong way sooner than you think. So please, my recommendation to you is don't try to predict what the future will definitely be. Either try to make a timeline divergent future, or just stick to genres that don't need to make any technological or social or cultural prediction whatsoever. You'll be happier, and I think your game will have longer legs because of it.
Yeah, he's right. He's right. And I like how I try to predict where this. I'm the 1,000th liker. I like how I try to predict where these videos are going to go, and I half the time I'm just wrong. But it was still a really good video about relevancy of your game and your stories and the ideas that you choose to to dive into. This is a good reminder for me with Golden Chronicles to make sure that I'm trying to write human stories that can be true now, as true as they were 100 years ago and as true as they might be 100 years from now, or as best as I can expect, where I'm, looking more into human emotions and behavioral psychology as opposed to trying to say, this is my view on view of races in this country at this period of time, because I just feel like I'm going to be a revolutionary and this is my statement and I'm right. So yeah, try to avoid that. Give your game longevity. It is what it is. So if you guys like that video, here's a link if you're watching on YouTube. Thanks for watching that one. I will have one more to put out today, remote work, which we're going to get to after this, and then I will have to go. So one more for today. Watch on YouTube. Thanks for watching this one, and catch me on this one, maybe.